So welcome back. We're speaking about healing America's narratives, and specifically Chapter 7, which is a chapter that deals with the post-9/11 wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we're going to do this in the context, as we said earlier, of both President Eisenhower's post-World War II precepts and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara's post-Vietnam lessons learned. But more specifically, on September 11th, 2001, Richard Clarke, who had been the national coordinator for security and counterterrorism under the Clinton administration, had been kept on board by the George W. Bush administration. And he arrived in Vice President Dick Cheney's office, where National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice was already present, just minutes after the attacks in New York and actually before the attacks in the Pentagon. And his best knowledge at that point was that it was an al-Qaeda attack. He knew enough about them from having studied them for years that there was a good chance that there would be more attacks coming. And obviously he ended up being right. So for the next 24 hours, give or take, Richard Clarke coordinated the response. Again, he gave the president and the vice president and the national security advisor and others his best sense of what was going on. At about 1 o'clock in the morning on September 12th, the next day, Clarke went home quickly to change his clothes and get a shower. And when he came back, probably 2 or 3 a.m., he was expecting just to get updated on what they were learning, if there were any subsequent attacks, if there was anything else that was going on that that had surfaced after he went home. And I'm going to quote him when he returned. This is what he found, quote, "Instead, I walked into a series of discussions about Iraq. At first, I was incredulous. Then I realized with almost a sharp physical pain that Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz were going to try to take advantage of this national tragedy to promote their agenda about Iraq. Since the beginning of the administration, indeed well before, they had been pressing for a war with Iraq." Now, we're going to go into some detail on what he meant by they had been pressing for a war with Iraq. We won't get to that in this episode, but we will get to that. As importantly, on January 25th, 2001, about a week after the Bush inauguration, Richard Clarke had asked National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice for a principals meeting. In other words, to put on the new administration's radar screen the importance of this group known as al-Qaeda, which had been a primary focus of his for some years during the Clinton administration. And National Security Advisor Rice and others didn't take it particularly seriously, and they actually never had a principals meeting, the one that Clarke requested, until September 4th. 2001, which was 7 days before the attacks took place. So the Bush administration really wasn't taking Clarke's concerns about al-Qaeda seriously. And we know what happened. To his credit, in his testimony, now I'm fast forwarding just to bring his story full circle. To his credit, when he was testifying in front of the 9/11 Commission after the attacks had taken place, he said, that he couldn't guarantee that even if they had met with him and listened to all the intelligence that he had on al-Qaeda, he said he couldn't guarantee that the attacks would have been prevented or avoided. So again, there's a level of integrity that he had. He didn't say, if they had listened to me, this wouldn't have happened. He basically said, maybe if they had listened to me, we could have been better prepared. So we'll pick up with this in our next episode. Thanks for listening and staying with me.